Kevin Durant has lived nearly 20 years in the NBA spotlight as a man divided in two. In public, he was a cold-blooded scorer, tall and lean, calm, almost unstoppable. But behind that image was a sensitive, lonely man who always had to protect himself from the never-ending judgments. He grew up with the void of a father, with the image of his mother Wanda Durant carrying the whole family on her shoulders, and those years planted in him a silent insecurity. He had to succeed, he had to bring the family out of poverty, he had to prove he was worthy. But when success came, peace did not come with it. Durant was loved, then hated, praised, then doubted, called a genius, then seen as someone who took shortcuts. He carried two parallel lives within him, one Kevin Durant of unstoppable shots, and one Kevin Durant returning to a quiet room after the game, reading the criticisms, hurting from being misunderstood, but still waking up, still training, still stepping onto the court as if his heart had never been hurt. That very willpower is the part few people see the most. Not the willpower to score more points, but the willpower to continue existing between glory and loneliness, between titles and judgment, between the man he is and the image America imposes on him. And no matter how misunderstood he was, Kevin Durant still built a career that NBA history cannot ignore. He was the NBA MVP in 2014, Rookie of the Year in 2008, two-time NBA champion with the Golden State Warriors, two-time NBA Finals MVP in 2017 and 2018, four-time NBA scoring leader, multiple selections to the All-NBA team, and NBA All-Star. In the colors of the United States national team, Durant became one of the greatest players in Olympic history, winning Olympic gold medals in 2012, 2016, 2020, and 2024, and becoming the all-time leading scorer in USA men's basketball history. From the Seattle Supersonics, Oklahoma City Thunder, Golden State Warriors, Brooklyn Nets, Phoenix Suns to Houston Rockets. Wherever Durant went, he left the mark of a rare offensive genius. He surpassed the 30,000-point NBA milestone, standing among the greatest scorers of all time, respected for his ability to shoot mid-range, three-pointers, handle the ball and score from every position on the court. Those numbers do not just tell about a superstar. They tell about a man who turned pain, loneliness, and years of doubt into an indelible legacy. Before we return together to the years no one knew about Kevin Durant, please hit subscribe to the channel, like and leave a heart if you believe that behind every champion is always a story worth listening to. Now, let us return to the childhood of the boy who grew up in the absence of a father, to understand why all of Kevin Durant's later glory was built from losses that very few people ever saw. And to understand why Kevin Durant always carried that insecurity within him, we must go back many years before he became one of the greatest players in NBA history. We must return to Washington, D.C., where Kevin Wayne Durant was born on September 29, 1988, then grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, in an ordinary working family that was never well off. Kevin's childhood was not covered by abundance, but what hurt him the most was not the material difficulties. It was the absence of his father. Wayne Pratt left the family when Kevin was very young, leaving mother Wanda Durant to care for the children alone. For a child, there are pains that cannot be named. Kevin did not fully understand the reason his father left, but he was old enough to feel the house suddenly become emptier, parent meetings missing one person, the first games without a father standing outside the sidelines cheering. That void did not disappear over time. It only quietly grew with Kevin, becoming part of the boy's quiet and sensitive personality. While many children could grow up carefree, Kevin soon realized his mother was carrying the whole world on her shoulders. Wanda Durant worked non-stop to support the children, trying to hide the financial pressures behind a smile every time she returned home. Beside her was Barbara Davis, Kevin's grandmother, who also devoted almost all her time to caring for the grandchildren. Those two women took turns filling the void left by the father, not with complaints, but with silent daily sacrifices. Kevin grew up in that love, but he also saw his mother's tired eyes after work, meals carefully calculated to be enough for the whole family, and nights when his grandmother still stayed up late preparing everything for the next day. He understood that every dollar earned had to be traded for a lot of sweat. Those very images made Kevin mature earlier than children his age. He no longer just dreamed of becoming a famous basketball player. He wanted his mother to rest, wanted his grandmother to no longer worry about money, and wanted his family to have a better life. That was the silent motivation that no trophy later could replace. In those days, basketball entered Kevin's life like a small miracle. The orange ball did not ask him why his father was not at home. The basketball hoop did not care if his family was poor or rich. On the court, Kevin no longer felt like a boy lacking a complete home. Each accurate shot was like a time he poured out his sadness without needing to say it in words. Each training hour made him believe his life could be different. The more he played basketball, the more Kevin felt he had found the only place where his heart could be at peace. No one expected that skinny, quiet boy would later become one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. But even when the whole of America later knew Kevin Durant, very few people knew that it all started from a boy who always carried the question of why his father had left, and from the silent promise that one day, with his own hands, he would change the lives of the women who had sacrificed everything to raise him. And it was that promise to change the family's life that made Wanda Durant the most important person in Kevin's entire journey. If childhood left him with a void because of his father's departure, then his mother was the one who quietly filled that void with love, discipline, and sacrifice that never demanded recognitions. After Wayne Pratt left the family, Wanda almost single-handedly shouldered the responsibility of raising the children. Her life had no real days off. From one job to another, she tried to earn enough money to pay rent, buy food, clothes, and ensure the children could go to school. There were days she returned home exhausted, but in front of Kevin and his siblings, she still forced a smile as if everything was fine. She understood that if she herself collapsed, the children would lose their last support. Beside Wanda was grandmother Barbara Davis, who always helped care for the grandchildren, so Wanda could go to work with peace of mind. Those two women did not have a prosperous life, but they created for Kevin a home full of love and discipline. Kevin grew up seeing his mother wake up very early every day and return very late. He witnessed hands calloused from labor, meals carefully calculated so no one in the house went hungry, and nights when his mother still quietly worried about the children's future. Those very images made Kevin understand very early that success was not a choice, but a responsibility. He did not want his mother to live like that forever. He wanted one day she would be able to rest, no longer have to worry about every bill or every small expense in the family. Wanda did not only teach Kevin how to become a good basketball player, she taught him how to become a decent man. She always reminded her son to be on time, to respect everyone, to know how to thank those who helped him, and never to be arrogant, no matter how talented he was. In that small house, Kevin learned that talent could take a person to the top, but only character could keep them there. Those lessons followed him throughout his career, from the days he was still a boy practicing shots in Maryland until he became an NBA star. As he grew older, Kevin increasingly felt he was carrying a debt that could not be measured in money. That was the debt to his mother. Every training session, every game, every effort more than others all stemmed from the single desire not to let Wanda's sacrifices become meaningless. That was also the reason he always trained with astonishing intensity, always wanted to perfect himself, and never allowed himself to easily be satisfied with what he had achieved. When Kevin entered the NBA and quickly became one of the most outstanding players in the league, fans only saw the beautiful shots and consecutive records being set. But behind all those successes was still the image of the mother quietly sitting in the stands, watching every step of her son. For Kevin, every point scored was one step closer to the promise he made to his mother years ago. The most emotional moment in his life came in 2014, when he was awarded the NBA Most Valuable Player title. In front of millions of viewers, Kevin did not talk much about himself. Nor did he praise his victories. He turned to Wanda, choked up recounting the years she raised the children alone, worked tirelessly so the family could have a better life, always believing in him even when no one knew who Kevin Durant was. Then he looked at his mother and said, "You the real MVP." Just one short sentence, but it made the entire arena fall silent. That was not a polite thank you. That was the gratitude Kevin had carried in his heart since childhood. After all the titles, the trophies, and the hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts, the greatest hero in Kevin Durant's life was still not a coach, a teammate, or a basketball legend. That hero was always Wanda Durant, the woman who accepted to carry all her own pain so her son could carry a dream big enough, strong enough, and resilient enough to change the fate of the whole family. From Wanda's love and discipline, Kevin Durant entered his teenage years with a burden no child should have to carry too early. He did not just play basketball for fun, he played basketball as if the future of the whole family lay in every shot. While other boys were still busy finding their place on the school court, Kevin spent most of his time in the gym, on outdoor courts, in small games where there were no cameras but enough pressure for a child to learn how to grow up. He grew tall quickly, so skinny that many people looking at him could not believe that body could withstand collisions. Long arms, narrow shoulders, skinny legs, a quiet posture often made Kevin look like a boy who had not yet grown into his own body that was exceeding his age. But beneath that skinny appearance was a silent determination. He did not need to say much. He let the ball speak for him. Each training session was a way Kevin pulled himself away from the old questions about the absent father, about the nights his mother was tired, about the fear that if he was not good enough, all the family's sacrifices would only be a sad story with no way out. Basketball was not just a sport. It was the place where Kevin could turn loneliness into dribbling rhythm, turn the feeling of lack into shots, turn things that could not be named into something clearer. Points. The AAU years honed that talent, but also took away Kevin's carefree youth. The continuous trips, games in front of coaches, scouts, better, stronger, more confident opponents made him understand early that basketball was no longer a simple refuge. It had become the path, and that path had no room for weakness. Each tournament was a test. Each opponent is a challenge. Every look from the stands seems to ask whether this tall, skinny kid is truly special or just another hope that will disappear when it hits reality. Kevin does not have the muscular build like many other young talents, but he has something that makes people unable to look away. A soft basketball feel, long arms, pure shooting ability, and a strange calmness of someone who has gotten used to living with pressure from a very early age. The more he competes, the further his name spreads. National Christian Academy, Oak Hill Academy, then Montrose Christian become the stages in the journey of a Maryland kid, gradually stepping out of the shadows of his childhood to become one of the most followed young talents in America. But behind each step forward, there is still a price. New school, new team, new expectations, new gossip. Kevin not only has to learn how to score, he has to learn how to live in the eyes of others. He has to learn how not to let praise make him fly too high, not to let doubt pull him too deep, not to let homesickness and family pressure make his hands shake at important moments. There are nights after games when others only see the scoreboard. Kevin returns to himself, with his aching body, with the familiar silence, with the feeling that he is running very fast, but still not sure if it is fast enough to save all the people he loves from the worries that have clung to them for too long. And perhaps that is why, every time he steps on the court, Kevin plays like someone reclaiming control of his life. There, Dad may be absent, but the hoop is still in the right place. Out there, the family may be lacking, but on the court, the rules are clearer than life. Out there, he may be seen as too skinny, too quiet, too fragile, but when the ball leaves his hand and falls cleanly through the net, all doubts fall silent in a moment. Each shot becomes a small secret between Kevin and destiny. The lonelier he is, the softer the shot. The more he is questioned, the harder the will. And when big universities start to pay attention, when the offers come more, when the name Kevin Durant is no longer only mentioned in local gyms, but has echoed in the national youth basketball world, he understands that his life is truly changing. But that change does not make Kevin loud, it only makes him more serious, as if in his heart there is always Wanda's voice reminding him where he comes from, who has sacrificed for him, and why he is not allowed to forget. In the end, Kevin chooses the University of Texas, a decision that takes him one step further away from his Maryland childhood, but also brings him closer to the NBA dream. It is not just the choice of a young talent who wants to compete on a big stage, it is the choice of a son trying to open a new door for his family. When Kevin leaves home to step into the next chapter, he does not carry many loud promises. He carries his still skinny body, his still quiet eyes, the shot that has become a place to store loneliness, and the belief that if he continues to shoot, continues to practice, continues to endure, one day all the pains of childhood will turn into something more beautiful. When Kevin Durant set foot at the University of Texas, he is no longer the silent talent from Maryland. He has stepped onto a bigger stage, where every step, every shot, every expression can become a topic of discussion. But even though he is seen as one of the brightest freshmen in America, Kevin still carries the appearance of the old boy, skinny, quiet, not liking to show off, always seeming to keep most of his emotions to himself. Texas gives him the opportunity to prove himself in front of the whole country, but at the same time it also takes away the last piece of a normal youth. There, Kevin does not just play for the team, he plays for his mom, for his grandmother, for the years the family lacked, for the unspoken promise that he will bring his loved ones to a different life. And right from the first games, the whole of America realizes there is something very rare in that person. Durant scores as if not bound by his skinny body. He shoots smoothly from mid-range, shoots from distance naturally, handles the ball softly, attacks from every position on the court. Opponents may be taller, stronger, older, but Kevin has something very hard to stop. The calmness of someone who has used basketball to survive even before it became a career. His only season at Texas quickly turns him into a phenomenon. Kevin is not just a good freshman. He is one of the best college basketball players in the entire United States. The numbers, the explosive games, the moments that make the audience stand up and applaud have turned him from rumor into reality. Prestigious individual awards come one after another. Naismith College Player of the Year, Wooden Award, AP Player of the Year, along with a series of other honors for the best college basketball player. For a freshman, that is not just an achievement. It is a statement that Kevin Durant is no longer a distant future. He is right in front of everyone's eyes. But fame coming too fast also brings with it a silent pressure. At just 18 years old, Kevin has to learn how to live with the feeling of being constantly watched. Every missed shot can be analyzed. Every imperfect game can make people question. Every praise brings heavier expectations. On the outside, everything looks like a dream. A kid from Maryland becomes a college basketball star, praised by the media, cheered by fans, noticed by NBA teams. But inside, Kevin is still the son who always thinks about his mom. He understands that the closer he gets to the NBA, the more real the opportunity to change his family's life becomes. And that very thing makes the dream both beautiful and scary. If he succeeds, he can give back to Wanda the years of sacrifice. If he fails, he will feel like he has let down all the people who believed in him. After a brilliant season, the decision to leave the University of Texas to step into the NBA is almost inevitable. It is not the action of a hasty young man chasing money. It is the decision of a son who sees the door that the whole family has waited for too long. Kevin knows he is still young, knows the NBA will be harsher than anything he has experienced, but he also knows opportunities like that do not come many times. When his name appears in the NBA Draft 2007, the whole childhood journey seems to shrink into one moment. The lacking houses, the exhausting training sessions, Wanda's figure after long workdays, the care of grandmother Barbara, the void left by his father, and all the shots he has made in silence. The Seattle Supersonics select Kevin Durant with the second pick, In that moment, the NBA door officially opens. People see a young talent stepping onto the professional stage. But for Kevin, it is also the moment when a promise begins to take shape. He does not yet know where the years ahead will take him, does not know there will be titles, controversies, betrayals, injuries, and loneliness. He only knows that he has gone much further than the boy who once found shelter in the orange ball. And when the Seattle hat is placed on his head, Kevin Durant does not just step into the NBA. He steps into the first chapter of his public life, where the whole of America will see his talent, but not necessarily see the pain that brought him there. From the moment the Seattle hat is placed on his head, Kevin Durant feels like he has stepped into a dream that his childhood was once too far to touch. But the NBA does not wait for anyone to mature gently. The Seattle Supersonics give him the first opportunity. But only after one season, the ground beneath his feet shifts again. The team leaves Seattle to become the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Kevin, still very young at the time, is suddenly placed in a role bigger than his age. He is not just a promising player. He becomes the face representing a new team, a new city, a community craving to believe it can belong on the big NBA map. Oklahoma City does not have a long basketball history like Boston, Los Angeles, or Chicago. They do not have decades of legends to lean on. They have Kevin Durant, a tall, skinny guy, quiet, with a shot soft like a breath and eyes always carrying the distant look of someone used to enduring pressure in silence. And that is why that city loves him very quickly. They look at Kevin and see the future, see hope, see a reason for the entire arena to stand up every night. At first, that love is so beautiful it is almost pure. Kevin is still young, Oklahoma is still new, and the two seem to grow up together. He scores, the city cheers, he improves, the fans believe more, he stumbles, they still patiently wait. After the first season, the Rookie of the Year award comes as the first confirmation that the once skinny kid from Maryland truly belongs on this stage. But Kevin does not stop at the promise. He turns the promise into a habit. Each season, he scores more, sharper, calmer. The pull-up jumpers, the mid-range shots over defenders' hands, the times pulling the ball and unleashing unstoppable shots gradually make the whole NBA understand that they are witnessing a different kind of superstar. He does not roar like many leaders. He does not need to pound his chest to prove his presence. He just scores, quietly, steadily, ruthlessly, as if each shot is his way of reminding the world that the boy who was once deprived is still moving forward. Then Russell Westbrook appears beside him, bringing fierce energy, storm-like speed, the fire that Kevin never shows outwardly. If Durant is a blue flame burning quietly beneath the surface, Westbrook is lightning tearing across the sky. They are so different that sometimes it seems they cannot harmonize, but that very difference makes Oklahoma fearsome. Then James Harden steps in, young, smart, skillful, with the ability to control the game and create points from his own rhythms. Serge Ibaka brings defensive power, blocks, toughness in the paint. A golden generation is formed before America's eyes. The Thunder is not just a young team. They are the image of the future NBA, fast, long, explosive, talented, and fearless. Kevin stands at the center of it all. He is the main scorer, the symbol, the face on the poster, the faith entrusted to every spring playoff. And the more successful he is, the bigger Oklahoma's love for him grows to the point it begins to carry weight. The consecutive scoring titles put Kevin into the ranks of true superstars. He is no longer a young talent. He is one of the most fearsome offensive players on the planet. Every night, opponents know he will score, but still do not know how to stop it. For Oklahoma, that is like a miracle. A city without many national sports icons suddenly possesses a player that the whole of America must mention by name. Fans wear number 35 jerseys, children imitate his shot, families come to the arena like attending a shared ritual. Kevin Durant becomes the son of the city. But love, when too big, sometimes is no longer just love. It becomes expectation. Then expectation becomes an invisible rope wrapped around a person's neck. The more Kevin scores, the more people want him to lead the team further. The more the Thunder wins, the more people believe the championship is only a matter of time. Every season that does not end with the trophy leaves a scratch. Every playoff loss makes the question bigger. Can Kevin have enough strength to take them to the end of the road? Can this generation stay together long enough? Can a city that has given him its heart receive back the dream they crave? To outsiders, that is the normal pressure of a superstar. To Kevin, it goes even deeper. He grew up with the feeling of having to repay his mom, having to change his family's fate. Now, as he became a symbol of Oklahoma, he had to carry the dream of an entire city on his shoulders once again. Once more, life placed expectations on him that were greater than the private man inside could admit. He was not just playing for himself. He was not just playing for Wanda. He was playing for the fans who believed he was their promise. The painful thing was that Kevin never showed that he hated that love. He was grateful for it. He understood that Oklahoma had embraced him when he was still trying to find his footing in the NBA. He understood that the city had helped him become a man, become a leader, become a superstar. But inside that gratitude, a weariness began to emerge that was very hard to name. When people love you for what they believe you will bring, you will fear the day you cannot bring that. When an entire city looks at you as the future, you are no longer allowed to be a young man learning how to fail. Kevin Durant, in those Oklahoma years, had become everything a new team needed: talent, hope, humility, the face of the franchise, the reason to believe. But in return, he gradually lost the right to feel light. Every shot was no longer just a shot, it was a promise. Every season was no longer just a season, it was an opportunity that could not be wasted. And every time he stepped onto the court amid the cheers of Chesapeake Energy Arena, the crowd called his name like they were calling a savior. Kevin could feel that love surrounding him. Warm, intense, sincere, but also heavy, suffocating, and increasingly like a cage built from that very love itself. And then that cage truly tightened for the first time in the summer of 2012, when the Oklahoma City Thunder advanced to the NBA Finals with a team so young that the entire United States believed they were not just watching a basketball team, but watching the future of the NBA being born before their eyes. Kevin Durant was barely in his 20s. Russell Westbrook exploded like a storm that had not yet learned to fear. James Harden was the sixth man of the year, with a beard that had begun to become iconic. Serge Ibaka was a wall of defense full of energy. They had overcome more veteran, more experienced, more playoff-tested teams, and each Thunder victory made Oklahoma believe even more that the dream was not far away. The city shook with pride. Green and orange jerseys filled the stands. People talked about a new dynasty, about a young group of players who could dominate the league for many years, about Kevin Durant as the future king of American basketball. But the finals were unlike any stage before. On the other side was the Miami Heat of LeBron James, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, a team also carrying the pressure to prove themselves, but more seasoned, more hardened, and more aware of the cost of failure. The Thunder won Game 1, and in that moment, everything seemed written for a fairy tale. Kevin scored as usual. Oklahoma cheered as if the championship had already begun to come their way. But reality arrived very quickly. Miami adjusted, tightened, and attacked every small weakness of a young team. LeBron played with the coldness of someone who no longer allowed himself to fall. Wade knew how to pull the game into experience. Bosh did the quiet but painful things. Game by game, the Thunder's dream was bent. Night by night, Kevin began to understand that talent could take a person very close to glory. But to touch it, more was needed than beautiful shots, more than the purity of youth, more than the belief that the future surely belonged to him. When Miami closed out the series and lifted the trophy, Kevin Durant stood there with the pain that every future champion must taste. The feeling of being good enough to dream, but not strong enough to take what he wanted. For many people, it was just an early failure for a young team with many years ahead. But for Kevin, that wound lingered beneath the jersey longer than people thought. He had seen the trophy up close. He had felt the heat of the biggest stage. He had heard the entire United States say that his era was coming. Then in a few short days, everything disappeared. No one remembers a runner-up team with the same tenderness. History usually only embraces the winners. And Kevin, who had spent his entire childhood proving he could lift his family out of hardship, suddenly realized that in the NBA, proving it once was never enough. After the 2012 finals, the Thunder still had talent, still had a future, still had explosive nights that made people believe the loss to Miami was just a stepping stone. But life rarely gives people as many intact opportunities as they think. James Harden left right after that, and the piece that had once made the Thunder more fearsome than any young team disappeared from the picture. Westbrook and then Durant faced injuries in the following seasons, causing the playoff dreams to be delayed, distorted, fragmented. There were years they were strong enough, but not healthy enough. There were years they were hungry enough, but missing just one person at the decisive moment. There were years they came very close, then were pulled down by small details that only the May and June of the NBA exposed so cruelly. For the fans, each new season was another hope. For Kevin, each new season was also the clock ticking louder in his head. How much longer for this generation? How much longer for the body? How much longer would the city be patient? How long would the love remain warm before it turned into disappointment? He still scored, still won individual awards, still became MVP, still made every defender understand there was no perfect defensive scheme against Kevin Durant. But somewhere beneath those 30-point, 40-point games, beneath the cheers, beneath the image of a superstar entering his prime, a fear began to grow. Maybe great talent did not guarantee a championship. Maybe a team the entire United States called the future could still fade before that future became reality. Maybe Oklahoma's love, no matter how sincere, was not enough to answer the question eating deep into Kevin's heart. If he stayed, would he ever touch what he had seen Miami lift before his eyes? The 2012 Finals was therefore not just a lost series. It was the first scar on Durant's championship dream. It taught him that the NBA owed no one a happy ending, owed young teams no extra time, owed loyalty no ring. And as the years after that passed with too many times being stopped by injuries, roster changes and painful failures, Kevin began to feel the door that had once opened wide for the Thunder was closing little by little. He still loved Oklahoma. He was still grateful to that city. But inside, a part of him began to hear another call. The call of a decision that one day would change not only his career, but also the way America looked at him forever. And that call finally rang loud enough that Kevin Durant could no longer pretend he did not hear it. In the summer of 2016, after many years in Oklahoma, after seasons full of shining hope that ended in pain, after the feeling that the championship door kept closing little by little before his eyes, Kevin stood before a decision that would change his entire public life. He could stay in the place that had loved him like a son, continue carrying the dream of a city, continue waiting for a moment no one knew would come or not. Or he could leave, choose a different path himself, put himself in a place where he believed his basketball could reach its highest form. The Golden State Warriors had just gone through a 73-win season, possessing Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and a basketball system so beautiful it sometimes resembled music. For Durant, it was not just a strong team, it was an invitation to step into freer, more open basketball, where he did not have to create every shot alone, where his talent could blend into a structure that was nearly perfect. But for the United States, that decision was not viewed with sympathy. It was seen as a surrender, an escape, a cut into the ideal of loyalty that fans often demanded from stars, even when the sports world itself was rarely loyal to them. When Durant announced he would join the Warriors, the love that had been given to him for many years instantly turned into fury. The entire NBA seemed to catch fire. Television shows debated non-stop. Former players spoke out. Journalists called it one of the weakest decisions by a superstar. Thunder fans burned number 35 jerseys, recorded videos, posted them online like a ritual to bury the memories. Those who once called him Oklahoma's pride now called him a traitor. The cheers that had once lifted him in Chesapeake Energy Arena turned into cold boos. The most painful thing was not being criticized by strangers. The most painful thing was being hated by the place that had once made him feel loved. Oklahoma had once been Kevin's second home. That city had grown up with him, and he had matured in the city's embrace. They had seen him from a skinny rookie to MVP. They had witnessed the nights he scored as if untouchable. They believed he was the one who would bring them their first trophy. So when he left, people did not just see it as a professional decision, they saw it as a personal betrayal. But behind that wave of anger was a much more complex truth. Kevin Durant did not leave because he hated Oklahoma. He left because he felt he needed a different path to become the basketball version he still craved. After many years of burdens, injuries, failures, and expectations, he chose what he himself believed was right, even knowing the price would be very high. And that price came immediately. From one of the most beloved players in the NBA, Durant became a figure put on trial every day. People no longer just analyzed his skills, they analyzed his character. They no longer just asked how well he played, but whether he had enough courage. They no longer just talked about tactics, but about honor, loyalty, legacy. Every microphone seemed to wait for an answer from him. Every sports show turned that decision into evidence to judge the man he was. On social media, where Durant had always been sensitive to every comment, the criticism became an endless rain. They said he ruined the balance of the NBA. They said he did not want to compete. They said the ring, if he got one, would not be worth it. And perhaps for someone else, those words could pass by. But Kevin was not the type who felt nothing. He read, he listened, he hurt. He tried to appear calm, tried to say he just wanted to play basketball, but no one could be judged by the entire United States for many months without carrying scars. This was where Kevin Durant's two lives split more clearly than ever. One life was the superstar stepping into the Golden State lineup, training with Curry, Thompson, Green, preparing for a season the whole world would watch every game just to wait for him to fail. The other life was the man returning home after practice sessions, facing the painful question of whether seeking happiness for himself had made him the villain in the eyes of those who once loved him. Durant had accepted trading his image to pursue a championship, but perhaps he could not fully anticipate how thoroughly that image would be torn apart. From then on, every success of his would come with a question mark. Every good game would be seen as something he had to do because he was on a too strong team. Every victory would be devalued by those who had decided not to forgive. That was the painful paradox of the summer of 2016. Kevin Durant stepped closer to the championship opportunity than ever before, but moved farther from peace than ever before. He was no longer seen as the boy who once tried to save his family from hardship, no longer Wanda's son, no longer the young man who had put Oklahoma on the NBA map. In the eyes of many, he was now only that decision, one signature, one choice, one stain they wanted to attach to his entire career. But Kevin kept moving forward. He might hurt, he might be angry, he might feel completely misunderstood, but he still stepped into the new season with the ball in his hands. Because if there was anything that had followed him from Maryland to Texas, from Seattle to Oklahoma, it was the ability to use basketball to answer what words could not heal. He could not convince everyone to love him. He could not force Oklahoma to forgive. He could not make the media stop calling his name in bitter debates. The only thing he could do was play basketball. Score, defend, sacrifice, win, and hope that one day, when the noise died down, people would understand that the summer of 2016 was not just the story of a superstar joining a strong team. It was the story of a man who had grown too tired of waiting for salvation from others. So he finally chose his own door, even if behind that door was glory, loneliness, and a hatred he would have to carry for many years after. Kevin Durant had chosen his path, and now he had to live with everything that choice brought. Right from the first season in the Golden State Warriors uniform, the entire basketball world witnessed an almost perfect lineup. Stephen Curry was still the greatest shooter in history. Klay Thompson continued to sow fear from beyond the three-point line. Draymond Green was the heart of the defensive system. And now, in the midst of all of them was Kevin Durant, who brought an almost unsolvable scoring ability. The Warriors did not just win, they dominated. They made even the strongest NBA teams have to accept that as long as Durant had even a few seconds of space, the game could change instantly. Kevin integrated so quickly that it seemed as if he had always belonged there, no longer having to carry the burden of creating every opportunity like in Oklahoma. He got to play freer, smarter, and also more beautiful basketball. The continuous passes, the off-ball movements, the trust between teammates helped Kevin fully unleash his abilities. By the NBA Finals in 2017, against LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers themselves, Kevin played basketball at an almost perfect level. He scored, defended, created plays, and appeared at the most decisive moments. The three-point shot right in front of LeBron at the end of Game 3 became one of the iconic moments of the series. The Warriors were crowned champions, and Kevin Durant touched the Larry O'Brien Trophy for the first time, which he had pursued for nearly a decade. When he was awarded the Finals MVP, many thought that finally all the controversies would end, that the first ring would heal the years of doubt, that Kevin would be recognized as one of the greatest players on the planet. But that did not happen. The first championship did not erase the criticisms, it only made the criticisms exist in a different way. People no longer said Kevin could not win a championship. They began to say he only won because he joined the strongest team. Every victory was questioned. Every outstanding performance was seen as obvious because he was playing with Stephen Curry. The trophy that Kevin had waited for many years finally lay in his hands, but the recognition he still sought remained out of reach. Kevin did not respond by playing worse. On the contrary, he played even better. The next season, the Warriors continued to advance to the NBA Finals. Once again, Kevin became the best player in the series. He scored with astonishing calmness, controlled the pace, made a difference at both ends of the court, and contributed greatly to help the Warriors win the NBA championship for the second consecutive time. The second consecutive Finals MVP put Kevin into the rare group of legends who could dominate the biggest stage of world basketball for multiple consecutive years. Professionally, there was almost nothing left to prove. He had been a regular season MVP, he had been an NBA champion, he had been a Finals MVP twice. He had become a player whom even the greatest opponents had to give absolute respect. But the greatest paradox in Kevin Durant's career lay precisely at that moment. The more successful he became, the more he felt the gap between himself and the public seemed not to narrow at all. The rings did not make Oklahoma stop being angry. 2 Finals MVP titles did not make those who had opposed him change their minds. The media still brought up the summer of 2016 more than what he did on the court. In the eyes of many people, Kevin Durant was not the hero of the Warriors, he was still the one who had left Oklahoma. That made his life increasingly divided into 2 separate worlds. On the court, Kevin was an almost perfect scoring machine. Teammates trusted him. Coach Steve Kerr gave him the most important role in the decisive moments. Warriors fans loved him for what he brought. But off the court, he still had to live with endless debates. Every time he opened his phone, he saw comment lines denying his value. Every sports program raised the question of whether those championships were truly deserved or not. Kevin tried to stay silent more, but he had never been someone who could completely separate himself from the outside voices. He read, he thought. Sometimes he responded on social media, sometimes argued with fans, not because he wanted to defeat them, but because deep down, he still hoped that someone would understand that behind the 2016 decision, there was not only the ambition to win a championship, there were also the years of failure, the wounds from Oklahoma, the seasons stolen by injuries that took away opportunities, and a man who was too tired of waiting. But the more he explained, everything seemed to become more complicated. Kevin gradually realized a painful truth. There were prejudices that could not be defeated by points. There were scars in the eyes of the public that even 2 championship rings could not erase. People always said victory would heal everything. But for Kevin Durant, victory only healed part of his being. It helped him fulfill the dream of becoming a champion. It helped him prove that he was good enough to dominate the NBA. But it could not force the whole world to look at him with different eyes. It was precisely during the most brilliant years with the Warriors that Kevin began to feel he was living farther apart between two lives. One life was the champion embraced tightly by teammates amid a shower of confetti. The other life was the man who returned to the hotel after the celebration, still carrying a feeling of loneliness and still wondering why, after all he had done, his heart had not yet found the peace that the boy back in Maryland once thought would come when the dream became reality. And it was precisely that lack of peace that followed Kevin Durant into the summer of 2019, where all the noise about titles, legacy, and recognition suddenly became small in front of a single sound: the sound of his body breaking right on the court. The Golden State Warriors entered the NBA Finals that year with the desire to win a third consecutive championship. But the lineup that had once terrified the entire league was no longer the perfect machine as before. The years of dominance had left fatigue on every pair of legs, every knee joint, every breath. Durant had previously suffered a calf injury, a pain that forced him to stay away from the court during the most important phase of the season. Without him, the Warriors still fought, still tried to advance, but everyone understood that to overcome the Toronto Raptors, they needed Kevin Durant. They needed that height. They needed that shot. They needed the terrifying calmness of someone who could score when the entire offensive system was strangled. And so the pressure began to weigh down. No one could know exactly what an athlete felt when the entire team, the entire fan base, the entire media were waiting for him to return. People talked about courage, talked about the warrior spirit, talked about how a champion had to be present when the season stood on the brink. But few talked about the fear of a human being when having to step onto the court with a body he could not yet fully trust. Kevin returned in Game 5. In the moment he appeared, the entire basketball world seemed to hold its breath. Part of them admired, part of them worried, and another part, more cruel, waited to see if he was strong enough to save the Warriors or not. At first, everything seemed heartbreakingly beautiful. Durant hit shots, moved, scored. In a few short minutes, people remembered why he was one of the most unstoppable players who had ever appeared. But tragedy often did not announce itself with thunder. It came in a play that seemed normal. Kevin received the ball, tried to get past the opponent, then suddenly stopped. His right foot planted on the floor, his body halted unusually, and in that moment, everything changed. He sat down, clutched the lower part of his leg. His face alone was enough to make the entire arena understand that this was no longer the old injury. This was something deeper, more cruel. A ruptured Achilles tendon. A phrase that could send chills down the spine of any basketball player. For a person who lived by the fluidity of movement, by the ability to stop, explode, change direction, elevate and shoot over every defensive hand, the Achilles was not just a body part. It was the cord connecting talent and professional life. When that cord snapped, Kevin Durant did not just leave the court in a finals game. He left the version of himself that the world had known. That scene silenced even those who had once criticized him. Teammates knelt down. The audience was chaotic between emotions of pity and confusion. The Warriors won that game, but the victory became small in front of the image of Durant being helped off the court, his face filled with pain that no trophy could cover. For Kevin, the most terrifying thing was probably not the physical pain at that moment. The most terrifying thing was the question it opened afterward. If this body no longer allowed him to do the only thing that had once helped him survive, who was he? The surgery came afterward, then the long days without playing, without cheers, without the familiar rhythm of the ball in a real NBA game. The person who had once made even the best defenders helpless now had to face the small but cruel things: standing up, walking, putting weight on the leg, believing that the heel would not betray him again. To outsiders, recovery was a word that sounded neat. To Kevin, it was months in the quiet training room where every movement came with doubt. A small step forward could make someone happy all day. A sudden pain could pull the spirit down into the abyss. There were no more scoreboards to measure value, no more stands to hide the fear. There was only Kevin, the doctors, the physical therapists, sweat, patience, and a question that kept ringing. Would he be able to come back? Those months were probably one of the loneliest periods in Durant's basketball life. Before, when criticized, he could answer with 30 points. When doubted, he could step onto the court and shoot over everyone's hands. But this time, he could not answer right away. His body did not allow it. The NBA continued. Teams changed. Fans moved on to new stories. The Warriors entered another chapter. And Kevin had to learn patience in the darkness. Learn to live when the world no longer saw him every night on the court. That was cruel to a person who had used basketball as a refuge since childhood. The court had once been where Kevin escaped from the emptiness of his father, from the pressure to repay his mother, from the feeling of being misunderstood. Now the court itself was temporarily taken from him. He had to relearn every basic movement like someone starting from the beginning. Even though his muscle memory still held images of the shots that had once silenced the entire NBA. And in that process, Kevin was not only healing the Achilles tendon, he had to heal trust. Trust that his leg would hold up. Trust that the explosion was still there. Trust that the shot had not been lost. Trust that one injury could not define the rest of his career. But the doubt did not come only from within. Outside, people also raised questions. Could Durant return to his old self? Could a player over 30 years old after an Achilles rupture still be a superstar? Were the rings in Golden State his final peak? Have the body finally caught up with all those years carrying the pressure, the minutes on the court, the collisions, and the expectations? Kevin heard those questions even when no one said them directly. All his life he had been used to being doubted. But this time the doubt was no longer aimed only at his choices or his legacy. It was aimed at the very foundation of the man himself, his ability to play ball. And that was the most painful part. Because for Durant, basketball had never been just a job. It was a language, a refuge. The way he loved his mother, answered his father, faced the public, and kept himself standing when everything else was shaking. 2019 took that away from him in a single moment. But it was also in the darkness after the surgery that Kevin began building another version of himself. Slower, more patient, less delusional about the invincibility of his body. The man who once lived as if every shot could solve everything now had to learn that there were wounds that could not be overcome by talent alone, but only by day after day, step after step, pain after pain. And when Kevin Durant looked toward the future, he was no longer chasing just one championship or one piece of recognition. He was chasing the right to become himself again, or at least to find a new version of himself after the night his body finally broke in front of the whole world. And from that night, his body broke. Kevin Durant stepped into a completely different battle. With no scoreboard, no whistle, no crowd standing up after every shot. The recovery journey after Achilles was not a few months waiting for the wound to heal. It was nearly 2 years learning how to make friends with a body that had once betrayed him. The man who once moved on the court as if his legs were born to serve the art of scoring now had to start from the smallest things. Planting his foot on the floor, bearing his body weight, walking without shaking, jogging lightly, changing direction, jumping, then believing that everything would not collapse again. While the NBA kept rushing forward, while new stories replaced the old ones, while the Warriors moved on to another chapter, Kevin stayed behind the doors of the training room, living in a silence that no superstar was truly prepared for. The Brooklyn Nets opened a new escape for him. Together with Kyrie Irving, Kevin chose Brooklyn as a place to start over, as a statement that his career had not ended on the Toronto court in 2019. But even when he signed the new contract, even when he saw the chance to build a team his own way, Durant still had to wait for his body to heal, wait for belief to return, wait for the day the ball in his hands no longer reminded him of the old pain. That period was not glamorous. There was no glory in the physical therapy room. There were no awards for the man who practiced walking in the morning and then tried to suppress the fear to practice jumping in the afternoon. But it was there that Kevin had to prove to himself what he used to prove to the world, that he was still here. When Durant finally returned to play, many watched with curiosity mixed with doubt. They did not know if he was still the old Kevin Durant, or just a diminished version. But then he scored, not slowly, not hesitantly, not like a man begging time for mercy. He scored with a smoothness that made the entire NBA pause. His mid-range shot was still soft. His reach was still unstoppable. The calmness in his handles still left opposing defenders feeling helpless. After nearly 2 years away, Kevin Durant returned as if a part of his basketball soul had never left the court. But the truth inside was not as simple as the numbers. Every jump required courage. Every sudden stop was a silent negotiation with painful memories. Every landing, his body had to relearn what it once did unconsciously, believe that it was safe. Fans saw the points and thought Durant had overcome it. But someone who had torn their Achilles understood that returning did not mean forgetting. There were fears living under the skin that did not show up in the stats. There were moments when just a slight tightness in the leg was enough to pull a person back to that finals night. Kevin had to fight not only against opponents, but against the memory of his own body. And what made that return more admirable was not just that he played well, but that he played well while still carrying all those ghosts. Brooklyn gave Durant a chance to refresh his image, but it also gave him a deeper lesson. In Golden State, he had learned that championships did not guarantee peace. In the injury, he learned that talent did not guarantee a body. And in Brooklyn, standing next to Kyrie Irving, preparing for a new chapter full of expectations, Kevin began to understand that if basketball was everything that defined him, then one day a single injury could take away his entire self. That maturity came slowly and painfully. Because from when he was a boy in Maryland, basketball had been his refuge, the way he repaid his mother, the answer to the absent father, the ticket that lifted his family out of deprivation. How could a person separate himself from the thing that had saved him? But after Achilles, Kevin could no longer live as if his body was permanent, and the basketball court was the only place he existed. He began to look at life more broadly. Family, investments, community, business projects, the young people who looked at his journey, and the truth that one day the sound of the ball hitting the floor would no longer echo every night as before. That did not make him love basketball any less. Perhaps it made that love more mature. No longer the desperate love of a boy who needed saving, but the love of a man who was grateful because this sport had carried him through so much darkness, but who also understood that he needed a soul outside of it. When Durant returned with a level of performance that astonished many, he did not just prove that a superstar could overcome an Achilles injury. He proved that a person could be pulled down to the bottom of doubt, stripped of the thing most familiar to him, forced to relearn from the beginning, and still find a way to stand tall. The world had continued moving while Kevin relearned how to walk, but when he returned, every shot of his was no longer just points. It was proof that even if time left someone behind in the darkness, willpower could still bring them back into the light. Not as whole as before, but deeper, more awake, and more aware that greatness lies not only in never falling, but in having the courage to learn to walk again when the whole world thought he would not return. And when Kevin Durant returned to the light, Brooklyn seemed like it would be the place where he rewrote everything. After the years of judgment in Golden State, after the Achilles night that left his career on the edge of the abyss, the Brooklyn Nets appeared as a new chapter full of promise. A big city, a new stage, a team ready to build around him, and beside him was Kyrie Irving, a friend, a teammate, another basketball genius who also carried his own contradictions. Then James Harden arrived, and in that moment, the entire NBA seemed to hold its breath. Durant, Kyrie, Harden, three names enough to make every opponent tremble, three offensive talents who could turn any game into an uncontrollable performance. On paper, it was a super team. In the imagination of fans, it was the shortest path to bring Kevin back to the peak. But this time, not under the shadow of the Warriors, but with a team considered his own. Brooklyn was supposed to be salvation. It was supposed to be the place where Durant proved he could lead a new project, could win a championship after injury, could step out of all the old controversies with an undeniable answer. But Kevin Durant's life rarely gave him a smooth path. Right when expectations were pushed to the highest, cracks began to appear. Injuries meant the trio rarely had enough time together. The pandemic turned the entire NBA upside down, bringing disrupted seasons, changing rules, mental pressures that no one was truly prepared for. Kyrie Irving continuously became the center of off-court controversies. James Harden, who was expected to be the final piece, gradually grew tired of the instability and eventually did not stay long. A team designed to become a dynasty turned into a room full of noise, where every day brought new questions, every week brought new crises, and every big game added another burden to Durant's shoulders. The tragedy was that Kevin still played at an extraordinary level. There were nights he carried Brooklyn on shoulders that had just returned after Achilles, scoring against defenses that focused all their attention on him. There were moments in the playoffs, especially against the Milwaukee Bucks, when Durant played as if he was trying to pull an entire dream back from the edge of the abyss with his own hands. The final shot with his toe barely touching the three-point line became the painful image of the Brooklyn era. Just a little more, just 1 inch more, and everything could have been different. But basketball, like life, is sometimes cruel in the smallest margins. Kevin had done almost everything, but almost was not enough. He could score 40, 45, 48 points. He could play nearly the full game. He could make even great opponents admit how terrifying he was, but he could not single-handedly heal his teammates' injuries, control the pandemic, extinguish every controversy, or keep a super team from falling apart when internal trust had begun to erode. And once again, the man who had once been asked to save Oklahoma, who had been judged for choosing Golden State, was now placed in the position of having to save Brooklyn from its own storms. That was a burden few saw. People looked at the salary, the name, the preseason promises, and concluded that failure was unforgivable. But inside, Durant had to live through a chapter full of exhaustion. Training to keep the body after Achilles, playing at an MVP level, answering the media, facing questions about Kyrie, Harden, the coach, the front office, the team's future, and his own legacy. Brooklyn was no longer a place for healing. It became another version of a cage, this time built from expectations, chaos, and a feeling of helplessness. When Harden left, the Big Three dream almost collapsed. As the following seasons continued in disappointment, Kevin began to see clearly that great talent could not save an unstable structure. Trade requests appeared as signs of a tired relationship. People criticized him again. They said he was not patient enough. They called him someone who wanted to run when things got hard. But perhaps few asked how many times Kevin had had to be patient in his life. Patient with a fatherless childhood, patient with Oklahoma after injuries and failures, patient with the hatred after 2016, patient with his body during Achilles' recovery. And now, patient with a team where every time it seemed to stabilize, a new storm arrived. In the end, Brooklyn fell apart not with a big explosion, but with a prolonged feeling of regret. Harden left. Kyrie left. Durant left too. One of the most anticipated projects in NBA history ended without a single trophy, without any complete resolution, only with what-if questions, if they had been healthier. If the pandemic had not turned everything upside down, if Kevin's toe had stepped back 1 inch, if trust inside the team had lasted longer, if basketball had just been basketball and not stretched by so many things off the court. When Durant left Brooklyn, he did not leave as a winner, but he also could not simply be seen as a failure. He left as a man who had added another heavy chapter to the book of his career. A chapter where he had returned from a terrifying injury, had played so well that the entire NBA was astonished, had carried a team through nearly impossible nights, but still could not turn chaos into glory. And perhaps the most painful thing was that Brooklyn had once been seen as the place where Kevin would find himself again after Golden State. But in the end it became another place that made him wonder if there was anywhere in the NBA that truly allowed him to find peace. After all of it, he stepped forward again, no longer as young as the day he left Oklahoma, no longer as whole as before Achilles, no longer naive enough to believe that talent alone was enough. Brooklyn did not give Kevin Durant the salvation it had once promised. It gave him a more bitter lesson. Sometimes, even when we do almost everything right, life can still fall apart because of things beyond our control. And when Brooklyn closed in regret, Kevin Durant returned to a place that had followed him for many years. A place with no hardwood floor, no teammates shielding him, no coach calling timeout to break the rhythm of the game. That was the internet. A different arena, colder, louder, and sometimes more cruel than any road arena in the NBA. On the basketball court, Kevin could see the opponent in front of him, could measure the distance, could use his height, skill, and experience to find answers. But on social media, the opponents had no faces. They were thousands of comments, millions of opinions, sentences taken out of context, judgments appearing even when he was not playing. Kevin became one of the most discussed athletes of the digital age. Every decision he made, every status line, every reply, every expression could be captured, shared, analyzed, and turned into evidence for a story that others wanted to tell about him. To many people, Durant was just a superstar who was too sensitive, a champion who did not know how to ignore the noise, a rich and famous person who still argued with strangers online. But that view was too easy, too simple, and also too lacking in compassion. Because if one looked deeper, people would see that behind those reactions was not just the ego of a star. It was a man who had lived his whole life with the feeling of being misunderstood. From the fatherless boy trying to prove he was worthy, to the son who wanted to repay his mother, to the player called a traitor when he chose his own path to a championship, to the champion still being denied even though he stood at the top of the NBA. For Kevin, every criticism online was not just words appearing on the screen. Sometimes it touched a much older wound. The story of the alternate account that once made him the center of mockery further complicated that image. When the incident was discovered, the entire internet laughed. People turned it into a meme, into proof that Durant was not strong enough to endure judgment. But perhaps the painful part lay in this. One of the best players on the planet, who could score against any defense, felt the need for a small, anonymous corner to protect himself. Not because he lacked titles, not because he did not know he was good, but because sometimes a person still wants to speak truthfully about their pain without the whole world staring at them. Kevin argued with fans, responded to reporters, sometimes sharply, sometimes tiredly, sometimes causing himself to be criticized even more. But in those dialogues there was something very human. He did not want to be turned into a one-dimensional character. He did not want his entire career to be reduced to the decision in 2016. He did not want the 2 rings to be spoken of as if there was no sweat. He did not want his injuries, recovery, sacrifices, family responsibilities, mental pressure, and love for basketball to be erased just because of a media story that was too easy to sell. That pressure stretched from year to year. Television talked about Durant, podcasts talked about Durant, former players talked about Durant, fans argued about Durant, and every time he spoke up, that speaking up was put into a new cycle of analysis. If he stayed silent, people said he was not facing it. If he replied, people said he was too sensitive. If he spoke the truth, people called him bitter. If he avoided it, people said he had no stance. That was the trap of the social media age. A star could be required to be authentic, but when he revealed real emotions, people punished him for not fitting the cold image they wanted. Kevin Durant had never been perfect in the way he reacted. There were times he was hot-tempered. There were times he said things that made public opinion explode. There were times he should have stepped away from the screen and let time answer. But that very imperfection made him much more real than many other carefully packaged superstars. He was not a stone statue, not a PR machine, not a man without pain just because of a large bank account and a long list of achievements. He was a man who had spent his whole life playing basketball at the highest level, but still carried the heart of the boy who once needed confirmation that he was not left behind. Kevin's sensitivity, which many used to mock, was also part of what made him love basketball so much. A person who does not feel deeply cannot be hurt deeply. A person who does not care will not need to react. Kevin cared about how he was perceived, cared about the truth of the story, cared that people who had never stepped into the gym at midnight, never gone through rehab after Achilles, never heard a city that once loved him turn its back, could so easily judge his courage. And perhaps what he sought was not absolute agreement. Not everyone had to love him. Not everyone had to forgive his decision. What Kevin wanted, more deeply, was to be seen fully. To see the champion, but also to see the son of Wanda, to see the player who left Oklahoma, but also to see the man who hurt after failures and injuries. To see the man arguing online, but also to see a man tired of being turned into a symbol of what others hated. The internet saw a star, but behind the screen there was a man bleeding in a way no one could hear, and Kevin Durant, though he had won many games in his life, was still fighting another much harder battle. The battle to be understood correctly, not as a perfect legend, not as the villain in someone else's story, but as a complex human being, talented, wounded, proud, and still trying to live true to himself in a world that always wanted to simplify him into a comment line. And after all those battles off the screen, Kevin Durant always returned to the only thing that had never truly left him: family. The media could argue about his legacy, fans could split sides over career decisions, the internet could turn every reaction of his into a new trial. But when that layer of noise settled, Kevin was still Wanda's son, the boy who grew up with the void of a father, the man who had spent nearly his whole life trying to bring his loved ones out of days of deprivation. His relationship with Father Wayne Pratt was therefore always a complicated chapter. Wayne had left when Kevin was very young, and no return could completely erase the feeling of being abandoned in those early years. But time, if long enough and honest enough, could sometimes soften the cuts that childhood thought would last forever. When Wayne returned to Kevin's life, especially from the years when Kevin began to mature more, the father and son did not immediately regain everything. They had to learn to stand beside each other, learn to say the things that had been missed, learn to accept that there were years that could never be recovered, but they could still build something from what remained. Wayne took Kevin to games, became more present in his son's basketball journey, and though the past could not be rewritten, that relationship gradually became a silent healing. For Kevin, forgiving his father was perhaps not forgetting the pain. It was the choice not to let that pain continue to rule his heart. But if the relationship with his father was a wound being patched little by little, then the love for Wanda was the bloodstream running through his entire life. His mother remained the greatest anchor, the place Kevin returned to in his mind whenever everything outside became too noisy. Even though he had become a millionaire, MVP, champion, even though he had stood on the world's biggest stages, Kevin always referred to Wanda in the voice of a son who knew he had been saved. She did not just give birth to him, she carried the burden for him in those early years, kept the family standing strong, taught him humility, and gave him a reason not to give up. Beside Wanda were Kevin's siblings, the people who helped him still feel he belonged to something not measured by points or titles. In the NBA world, where every relationship was sometimes stretched by money, power, and fame, the Durant family was still the private part of life that Kevin tried to protect. He did not need to show it off, perhaps because he understood that the most precious things were often those that did not need to be proven to the public. But when it came to romantic love, Kevin's story carried another sadness, quieter and harder to name. He was once engaged to Monica Wright, a talented basketball player, a woman who understood somewhat the life of an athlete, understood the sacrifices and discipline that sports demanded. There was a time when it seemed Kevin would build his own home, a place that was not just for mother, siblings, teammates, or friends, but had a life partner standing beside him after long games and stormy seasons. But that relationship ended before marriage. There was no noisy drama that needed to be staged from that. Only the sad truth that sometimes two good people still could not walk together to the end of the road, especially when one was living in the rhythm of an NBA superstar, pulled by game schedules, expectations, pressure, new cities, and a mind that had never completely rested. Kevin had stepped through adulthood, gone through Oklahoma, Golden State, Brooklyn, Phoenix, and the chapters after that, but still had not started a family, had no children. To some people, that was just a personal detail. But in Durant's story, it was like a regrettable silence. He had saved his family from hardship, had turned Wanda's dream into reality, had bought the safety that childhood did not have, had helped his loved ones live in a different world, but his own home, where a man returned not as a superstar, but just as a husband, as a father, as an ordinary person loved without needing to score points, was still something unformed. Perhaps that was the price of a life swallowed by basketball. Perhaps that was a choice. Perhaps that was a wound. Only Kevin knew. Currently, his life was not just revolving around games. Basketball was still the center, still the first language of his soul, but alongside that were investment projects, media, business, charity, and efforts to build a legacy off the court. Through community activities, projects supporting youth, education, and sports, Kevin seemed to be trying to give back to other children what basketball had once given him: a way out, a belief, a place to start over. But no matter how large his assets, how broad his investment portfolio, how far his fame reached, what Kevin sought deepest was probably still peace. A peace simpler than any trophy. Peace when being seen as a human being rather than a debate. Peace when loved ones were healthy. Peace when he could step into the gym, not to prove to the whole world, but just to feel he still loved this game. Kevin Durant had built a career big enough to save his family from the worries of childhood, but he himself was still learning how to build a shelter for his own heart. And perhaps that was the quietest tragedy. The man who had brought his whole family to safety was still searching for the feeling of being home in his own life. And perhaps that was where Kevin Durant's story became the most painful. Not in the losses, not in the boos, not even in the night his Achilles tore in front of the whole world, but in the truth that one of the greatest players in basketball history still always had to search for the feeling of being home in his own life. Looking back at that journey, we see a boy who grew up in Maryland with the void of a father, with mother Wanda shouldering the whole family, with grandmother Barbara keeping the poor days from turning into despair. That boy found the orange ball as a refuge, then turned that refuge into the path that brought the whole family out of deprivation. From Texas to Seattle, from Oklahoma City to Golden State, Brooklyn, Phoenix, and the chapters after this, Kevin Durant had built a career that very few people on the planet could touch. He became MVP, Rookie of the Year, multiple NBA scoring champion, two-time NBA champion, two-time Finals MVP, Olympic champion, one of the purest scorers basketball had ever produced. But if one only looked at that list of achievements, people would miss the most human part in his story. Because every glory of Durant almost always came with a loss. When he became the hero of Oklahoma, he also began to have the city's love turned into a cage of expectations. When he left to find a championship, he won the rings but lost part of his image in the public's eyes. When he stood at the top with the Warriors, he was still asked if that victory was valuable enough. When he tried to come back in the 2019 finals, his body betrayed him in a cruel moment, forcing him to relearn every step as if the old greatness had never existed. When he came to Brooklyn to find redemption, he was swept into another storm of injuries, pandemic, controversy, and breakup. And through all of that, the internet never stopped seeing him as a topic, a debate, a character to judge, while behind the screen was still a man who just wanted to be understood correctly. That was exactly the two lives that Kevin Durant had lived for nearly 20 years. One Kevin Durant of millions of fans, tall, cold, scoring as easily as breathing, lifting trophies, receiving awards, stepping into big games with an unchanged expression. And another Kevin Durant, only family, close friends, and those truly near him could understand. The son always grateful to his mother, the man who once hurt because of an absent father, the lonely friend in hotel rooms, the athlete sitting in the recovery room, wondering if he was still himself. The man sensitive to every comment not because of weakness, but because his whole life he had to fight to be seen fully. That second life was not a dark secret. It was not something that needed to be exposed like a scandal. It was how he existed. It was the skin beneath the jersey. It was the place holding pains that applause could not heal. The wounds from childhood had taught Durant to crave stability. Wanda's sacrifices taught him gratitude and to work as if every day carried the meaning of repaying love. The hatred after 2016 taught him that the public could love a person very quickly and turn their back just as quickly. The Achilles injury taught him that the body, though once the tool of genius, was still fragile before time. Brooklyn taught him that talent could not save every structure collapsing on its own, and social media taught him that there were battles that could not be won with a final shot. But the most admirable thing was that Kevin Durant still did not turn those wounds into complete bitterness. He still played ball, still trained, still came back, still invested, did charity, supported the community, opened opportunities for children who were once like him, still referred to his mother as the brightest light of his life, still went through controversies with an awkward but very human honesty. People might forever debate the choice to go to Golden State. Oklahoma might always remember him with both love and hurt. His rings might always be placed in parentheses by some people, but history, if fair, would have to look beyond the noise. History would see a man who had changed the way we understood scoring at the height of a forward, a player who made every defensive concept helpless, a champion who came back after an injury that could destroy a career, an Olympic symbol of American basketball, and above all, a person who had never stopped moving forward despite being misunderstood more than most other champions. After every title, what remained was not just gold cups, championship rings, or numbers engraved in record books. What remained was the image of Kevin Durant still standing there, skinny like the old days, but much more resilient, carrying gratitude for family, resilience in the face of adversity, and a heart that had been wounded but had never given in to death. His two lives in the end were not a false split. They were proof that a person could be both great and fragile, both victorious and lonely, both known by the whole world and still craving to be truly understood by someone. And if there was one most beautiful truth in Kevin Durant's story, it was this: he did not survive because he had never been hurt. He survived because after every time he was left behind, judged, betrayed by his body, dreams shattered, he still chose to stand up, pick up the ball, and continue being himself. Kevin Durant's story makes us ache not because he failed, but because even when winning, he still had to carry so many unseen wounds. From the boy in Maryland, who grew up with his father's absence, Kevin early learned that love could leave, but responsibility stayed. The image of Wanda Durant working to exhaustion, along with grandmother Barbara Davis keeping the family from falling apart, turned every shot of Kevin into a promise to repay. But his tragedy lay in this: the higher he rose, the more he was misunderstood. Oklahoma once loved him like a hero, then the very place turned its back when he chose Golden State. 2 championships and 2 finals MVPs did not heal the wound of honor, because many people still only saw the 2016 decision and forgot the years he had carried expectations, failures, and injuries. The Achilles night in 2019 was the most heartbreaking image. A genius who once lived by his body suddenly had to relearn how to walk, while the entire NBA continued moving forward. Brooklyn again opened hope, then closed in regret, and the internet turned him into a topic for judgment instead of a human being trying to be understood correctly. For the American people, the lesson from Durant was very close. Do not judge a person only by their most controversial choice, by assets, titles, or media image. Behind every successful person there might be a child who once lacked, a son trying to repay his parents, a sensitive soul fighting not to collapse. Kevin Durant deserved to be honored not only for the trophies, but because he had hurt, had been judged, had lost peace, but still continued to stand up and live true to himself. If Kevin Durant's story makes you feel the pain behind a champion, please subscribe to the channel and leave a heart to honor his never-give-up journey. Thank you for following. See you again in the next video with another story about glory, loss, and the will to stand up after darkness.